The Supreme Court may have ended its term, but it's still working. This is unprecedented on the Legal AF channel, and I'm Dina Doll. Michael Popak, my usual co-host, is traveling, but we didn't want to miss a week to update you on the continuing developments of the Supreme Court. As we have talked about in other episodes, the Supreme Court is going to stay busy under Trump because of a lot of requests with this emergency docket, the shadow docket. The Supreme Court made decisions involving whether or not Trump can fire federal employees en masse. They also made a decision regarding whether or not to hear transgender athlete state ban case, and a case involving Florida immigration law. So let's get into it. In terms of the Florida immigration law, Florida had passed a law very similar to the Texas law, which stated that as somebody coming undocumented into their state was a state crime. Now, the issue with this is that immigration law is exclusively a federal jurisdiction. Federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over our immigration. This is something that has been decided by the Supreme Court, has been practiced by the courts for a very long time. But as we know, Texas did this first. Now Florida is doing it. They were trying to create their own state law, criminalizing being an immigrant, an undocumented immigrant in their state. So the lower court in Florida said that it was paused the law while they were deciding, again, substantively, while it moves up into the courts, but asked the Trump administration and people in Texas asked the Supreme Court to basically overturn that, to allow Florida to criminalize being undocumented in their state. Trump filed a brief with the Supreme Court saying that the reason why that state law should be upheld is because it was consistent with how the federal government wanted to enact its immigration policies. Ironic, because as we know, the Trump DOJ has sued the state of California for their sanctuary policies. And in that lawsuit, they argue that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over immigration policy. But in this case, in Florida, they try to intercede in order to allow Florida to have their own separate immigration law. Well, the Supreme Court declined to take the case, which means that as of now, that Florida immigration law is not in effect, and it is going to be working its way up the appellate court in Florida. The Supreme Court has decided to take a case regarding the state bans of transgender athletes. 27 states currently ban transgender athletes from playing in sports. And the ACLU, among others, has sued, saying that this is a violation of Title IX because Title IX disallows any discrimination if you are going to be receiving federal funding. The Supreme Court agreed to take the case, not as an emergency issue, but actually on the docket, which means next term they will be hearing oral arguments and be issuing a decision as to the constitutionality of the bans of transgender athletes in sports. The family members of the transgender athletes argue that the state law requires rules that are vague, invasive, arbitrary. These are all things that the Supreme Court is going to take a look at and decide. Probably shouldn't hold our breath that they are going to side in favor of the families, because as we saw with this last term, specifically in Tennessee with Skirmetti, they allowed the ban of the non-surgical hormone blockers that the families wanted to be able to give to their children in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee banned it, and the Supreme Court sided with Tennessee. So this is yet another case, also involving the transgender community, but obviously in a different sector, as this is to do with sports, which was perhaps the hottest issue that the Republicans and MAGAs continued to talk about, not only in the lead up to the November 2024 election, but post the 2024 election. So we will surely see not just the law, but politics come to a head in the lead up of that Supreme Court decision. The other very important case that the Supreme Court decided had to do with the lower court's pause of Trump's attempt to significantly restructure government agencies without government approval. As we know, the lower court ordered a stay and said that he could not fire hundreds of thousands of federal employees until the substance of the case was reviewed. However, the Supreme Court, in an unsigned order, went ahead and reversed that lower court decision, meaning that Trump can fire hundreds of thousands of employees while the courts decide whether he legally can fire hundreds of thousands of employees. Justice Sotomayor concurred with the majority in perhaps an unusual stance. We have seen Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson sometimes being the lone two dissents during this term. She said in her concurring opinion, the reason why she was allowing this to move forward was because the trial court judge could still review the plans submitted by Trump and decide that such plans were unlawful. Essentially, she was saying this was too soon, that the plan could be crafted in a way for him to completely restructure agencies in a lawful manner. And if the plans weren't lawful, then the lower court judge could do a stay. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, however, just really spoke to the reality of what we are all thinking and seeing, which is Trump wants to completely restructure these agencies. We see him taking actions all the time that are not according to law. He doesn't really care about whether or not something is according to law. Do we really believe his plans are not going to be according to law? She says in her dissent, multi-page dissent, by the way, she says, in my view, this decision is not only truly unfortunate, but also hubristic and senseless. Lower court judges have their fingers on the pulse of what is happening on the ground and are indisputably best positioned to determine the relevant facts, including those that underlie fair assessments of the merits, harms, and equities. I see no basis to conclude that the district court erred, let alone clearly so, in finding that the president is attempting to fundamentally restructure the federal government, because of course he is. I understand Justice Sotomayor is maybe taking a legal philosophy of do as little as possible until the facts make it so you have to take action. But we hear Project 2025. We know what he's trying to do. He is trying to completely restructure these agencies without congressional approval. She speaks to that in her lone dissent. So that's a quick recap on what the Supreme Court has still doing, even during what they are on recess. And because of the way Trump is acting, we are sure this is probably not going to be its sole actions during the summer break. In fact, the Ninth Circuit may now be reviewing the Newsom case. Newsom, as we know, sued Trump about federalizing the National Guard. The three-court panel of the Ninth Circuit ruled in favor of Trump. One of the judges on the Ninth Circuit has just requested that the parties issue briefs as to whether or not the entire en banc Ninth Circuit should review that case. If the entire en banc Ninth Circuit reviews that case, they will almost certainly rule in favor of Newsom just because of the makeup of the Ninth Circuit. And if that is the case, we will see Trump go ahead and appeal that to the Supreme Court, which we will cover here on Unprecedented if that does indeed happen. So if you're not yet subscribed, please be sure to hit that free subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes of Unprecedented and all the many hot takes we put out on the Legal AF channel.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.